Number 4. The Macomb Poltergeist. In the summer of 1948, the McNeil family of Macomb, Illinois, were subjected to one of the most violent pyrotechnic hauntings ever recorded. Arthur McNeil had just ended a bitter divorce with his wife and had won custody of his 2 children, 13-year-old Wynette and her younger brother Arthur Jr. The 3 moved to the farm of Charles Wiley, Arthur's brother-in-law. Wynette was particularly unhappy with the move, desiring to live with her mother in Bloomington. On August 7th, the phenomena began when small brown spots appeared on the home's wallpaper, which quickly burst into flame. This continued for several days, and eventually neighbors were enlisted to help battle the increasing fires. Buckets and pans of water were left around the house, and when a spot appeared, it would quickly be doused. The local fire chief was called in to help, and he ordered the family to strip all of the wallpaper from the walls. In front of dozens of witnesses, brown spots continued to appear on the bare plaster, which as before burst into flame. Fires also appeared on the front porch and on curtains and one of the beds. The National Fire Underwriters Laboratory examined samples of wallpaper from the home and reported that they did not contain any traces of flammable compounds. The following week, the phenomena intensified as over 200 fires broke out, an average of 29 per day. Eventually, the house burned to the ground, forcing the family to move into one of the barns. Fires continued to appear in the barn, the milk house, and the chicken coop. That same day, the barn burned down, quickly followed by the second barn on the property. The family moved into a nearby vacant house, but the phenomena followed them there. As headlines about the mysterious fires were appearing in almost every major newspaper in the United States, the U.S. Air Force even became involved in the investigation. They reported that the fires may have been caused by some sort of directed radiation, but offered no explanation as to why that would be occurring. On August 30th, the deputy fire marshal and a state's attorney privately subjected Wynette to an hour's intensive questioning, after which they reported that she had confessed to starting the fires due to being unhappy with being forced to live with her father. As a result, Wynette was sent to live with her grandmother, the phenomena ceased, and the media considered the case closed. However, it has never been adequately explained how one 13-year-old girl could set hundreds of fires without being noticed by the dozens of witnesses present, or how she could have caused spots to appear on the walls, which would burst into flames moments later. Many consider the case to be an example of poltergeist activity. Most paranormal researchers consider poltergeists to be distinct from hauntings, which involve the spirits of the dead. Poltergeists do not involve spirits at all, instead perhaps being best described as an extremely rare phenomena which sometimes manifests itself around people who are extremely unhappy or adolescents entering puberty, both of which would apply to Wynette. The comment from the Air Force about directed radiation is also interesting. In the 1960s, it was reported, although never proven, that the Soviets had experimented with using specific types of radio waves to alter thinking patterns, and they had allegedly tested these weapons on the citizens of Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. Could the Macomb phenomena actually be the result of either the Soviets or a shadowy part of the United States government testing an experimental weapon? If Wynette was indirectly responsible for the phenomena, then the move to her grandmother's must have made her happier, as there were no more reports of mysterious fires. Unfortunately, she went on to live a troubled life, being arrested several times for theft and prostitution as an adult. As to what really caused the mysterious fires on the Wiley farm, we will probably never know. Number 3. The Flat Rock Fires. In 1954, a family in the tiny community of Flat Rock, Newfoundland, Canada, experienced their own terrifying pyrotechnic experience. The phenomena began one day in mid-November when the family patriarch Mike Parsons and his wife both smelled smoke in the family's kitchen. Hunting around for the source of the smell, they discovered that a dictionary in the wood box, where the family kept wood and other items to be burned in the fireplace, was on fire. Though the burning book was surrounded by flammable material, none of it had caught fire. The family were puzzled, but brushed the incident off. Several days later, Mrs. Parsons and her daughter Josephine were in the house while Mr. Parsons was out milking the family's cows. The two women smelled smoke, but could not locate the source. Josephine called her father and uncle into the house to help them look, and Mr. Parsons discovered that a sack of sugar in a cupboard was on fire. Mr. Parsons reached to grab the sack in order to toss it outside, but as soon as he touched it, the fire mysteriously went out. Over the next few weeks, the phenomena continued. A box of religious literature, which rested on a dresser, burst into flames, but burned only a small groove in the wood of the dresser itself. An upstairs room, which was not wired for electricity and was not located near the home's chimney, experienced several small fires in different corners of the room, all of which quickly burned away, leaving little to no damage. In one of the most bizarre incidents, a doll belonging to one of the Parsons' grandchildren, which had been left lying on the floor, suddenly erupted into flames, which seemed to spring from within the doll itself, and in a few moments the doll had completely burned away. The Flat Rock fires, other than being mysterious fires which started without apparent cause, shared little similarities to the fires experienced by the McNeil family. The fires in the McNeil family's house, although mysterious in origin, behaved as normal fires. That is, they spread to nearby flammable objects as normal fires would, and required human intervention to extinguish them. The fires in the Parsons family home did not spread, even when near extremely flammable sources, and often quickly burned themselves out. As well, there was no troubled adolescent in the Parsons family home to provide the necessary catalyst for poltergeist activity. Both the local fire department and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, abbreviated as the RCMP, investigated the mysterious fires. Skeptical members of the public suspected that the family were manufacturing the fires themselves, in order to eventually burn the house down, blame the unseen force, and collect the insurance, but the RCMP quickly ruled out this theory as the home was not insured. The RCMP could find no explanation for the fires, ruling out natural causes, and they could find no evidence that the family were in any way responsible for the strange events. They eventually reported this fact to the Attorney General of Newfoundland, who declined to publicly comment on the case. As the fires continued, the family were at a loss and were afraid to sleep at night. Eventually, they called in a priest, who blessed the house. As quickly as the fires had started, they stopped. The family went on to lead normal lives, never again reporting any kind of supernatural occurrences in the home. Whatever force was causing the fires in the first place remains unknown. Number 2. The Alabama Fire Poltergeist. Calvin Tuck, his wife Willie Bell, and their 6 children, who ranged in age from 3 months to 9 years, were an African-American family who lived in Talladega, Alabama in 1958. On the morning of August 25th, a small fire broke out in their home. That in itself would be unremarkable, but over the next 3 days, a total of 22 fires occurred in the family's home. Except for one fire, which consumed a mattress, all of the fires started high up on the home's walls, near the ceiling. The mysterious fires burned with a blue-red flame, and according to witnesses, resembled burning sulfur. Firefighters who came to the scene, including the fire captain, were at a loss to explain the phenomena. The home was not wired for electricity, ruling out faulty wiring as a cause. The Talladega County Road Commissioner Leslie Hutto was one of many who visited the home, and attempting to locate the source of the fire, he began scraping a wall with his knife, only to have flames flare up right into his face. He had no explanation for what he had seen. By August 27th, the home had been ruined by the many fires, so the family was forced to relocate to a nearby tenant house. 4 fires broke out within the first day, and Calvin Tuck then did a very strange thing, likely brought on by stress and fear. He gathered all of his family's remaining belongings and made a bonfire out of them. This fire was the only one affecting the Tuck family that was ever explained. The Tucks then moved into the home of Willie's brother, Daryl Sutton. As they were leaving the tenant house, it burst into flames and quickly burned to the ground. Relocating his family failed to bring an end to the phenomena. On the very first day they were living with the Sutton family, 5 more mysterious fires broke out in that home. On Labor Day morning, the Sutton house was visited by 2 police officers. One of them, Lieutenant Ben Cooley, witnessed a quilt hanging on a tree outside burst into flames before his eyes. Within moments, the quilt was burned black, except for one small end which remained untouched. Curious, Cooley attempted to set the unburned end on fire with a match, but found that he could not get it to burn. "I saw it, but I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen it," he said. It is worth noting that Calvin Tuck, who many had suspected of setting the fires, particularly after his bizarre bonfire, was not home at the time of this incident. Daryl Sutton, fearing for his own family's safety, asked the Tuck family to leave after a loaf of bread caught fire in the kitchen. The next day, the family moved in with Calvin Tuck's father. Buckets and pans of water were placed all over the house as a precaution. Calvin Tuck decided to visit a local witch doctor, who told him that the fires were the result of a voodoo curse placed on the family. He sold Calvin the recipe for a magic potion that he was to prepare and bury, and provided him with some herbs for his family to chew. However, this remedy had no effect, and the mysterious fires continued to break out in Calvin's father's home, the 4th home the family had lived in under 2 weeks. On the 3rd day in their new home, the family was visited again by Lieutenant Ben Cooley, who brought along Chief of Police Leon Curley and State Fire Marshal Frank Craven. About 20 minutes into their visit, a fire erupted among some rags that were sitting on a kitchen shelf. After the fire was extinguished, Leon Curley noted that a greenish substance was visible on the rags, and began to suspect that someone in the Tuck home was responsible for arson. The following Monday, Calvin and Willie had located a friend in the nearby town of Anniston who was willing to put them up. Feeling they had inconvenienced their family enough, they moved their children into their 5th home in under a month. Unfortunately, they could not escape the fires, which followed them again. The Anniston police, however, did not waste any time investigating. They simply arrested Calvin Tuck on a vagrancy charge and jailed him for what they claimed was his own protection. By this time, several people, including the chief of Anniston Police, the Talladega fire captain, and the state fire marshal Frank Craven, were sure that an arsonist was responsible for the fires. The Talladega police chief Leon Curley was not completely sold on the arsonist theory, but he did send some remnants of burned wallpaper and other burned items taken from the Tuck's home to the Alabama State Toxicology Lab for analysis to see if any accelerants could be detected. The lab's official report was inconclusive, although they did state that trace amounts of phosphorus were found on some of the burned items. Phosphorus is a highly flammable substance. However, it is also quite poisonous and is not sold on the open market. Additionally, trace amounts of phosphorus can occur naturally in some organic matter. Then, on September 22nd, Anniston police announced that 9-year-old Calvin Tuck Jr. had confessed to starting the fires. The officers who questioned him said that he admitted to playing with matches, and 2 of the smaller children in the family said that he had started the fires. Allegedly, the boy also admitted to lighting rags on fire and bundling them up so that they would smolder and burst into flame a short time later. Calvin was released from jail and his son was taken into custody. However, a judge quickly ordered him to be returned to his parents, stating that police had insufficient evidence with which to hold him. At this point, the case takes on parallels to that of the Macomb fires. Like in that case, once a guilty party had been identified, the majority of the public considered the case closed. Also, as in the Macomb case, the the fires stopped as mysteriously as they had started, and again like in the Macomb case, many who had witnessed the phenomena firsthand knew there was no way that the official story could possibly be true. One of the most adamant in his refusal to accept the explanation was Lieutenant Ben Cooley. "How could smoldering rags be concealed in the quilt that I saw suddenly burst into flames in the yard?" he demanded. Doubters of the official story also included other policemen, firefighters, and dozens of independent witnesses, many who reported seeing fires occur when Calvin Jr. was not even home at the time. Additionally, Fire Marshal Frank Craven, while he considered arson to be the most likely explanation for the fires, did not believe Calvin Jr.'s supposed confession and stated that as far as he was concerned, the mysterious fires would remain an open investigation until the real cause was determined. Technically, it still remains an open investigation to this day. Number 1. The McDonald Farm Poltergeist. In the early 1920s, strange events began to befall the McDonald family of Caledonia Mills, Nova Scotia, Canada. Although mysterious fires were the largest part of this haunting, unlike the other cases on this list, there were other unexplained phenomena experienced by the McDonald family, which consisted of 70-year-old Alexander McDonald, his wife Janet McDonald, and their teenage adopted daughter, Mary Ellen. The first unexplained happenings began in the winter of 1920. One morning, Alex McDonald entered his cattle barn to find that all of his horses' tails had been braided overnight. Alex suspected one of his farm hands was playing a joke on him, but all denied responsibility. A few nights later, he entered the barn to find that all of his cows and horses had swapped places overnight. He was puzzled as to how herding the animals around in the middle of the night could have been accomplished without creating enough noise to wake the family, but he still brushed the incident off as an elaborate practical joke. As the winter wore on, there were several instances where his cattle were set loose from the barn. Rounding the animals up, it was noticed that the cattle appeared spooked. Many were trembling and covered in sweat. Still suspecting a prankster, Alex decided he wasn't going to make it easy for the culprit. With the help of his farm hands, heavy stakes were pounded into the floor of the cow house, and each cow was secured to a stake with heavy chains. Satisfied, the men left the barn and headed towards the farmhouse for dinner, only to hear a loud noise behind them. The barn door burst open and the terrified cattle stampeded out. They were all free of their chains. This incident deeply shocked Alex, his farmhands, and the family. They could not see how it was possible that a prankster had crept into the barn unseen by anyone and released all of the cattle from their chains in the matter of a few moments. As disturbing as this incident was, things were about to get worse. On the morning of January 6, 1921, Alex woke before his wife and daughter and went downstairs to start the morning fire in the kitchen range. As he approached the range, he was startled to see several glowing cinders atop it. He looked up and saw that a patch of the ceiling above the range was glowing. It looked like the ceiling had been on fire at some point during the night, but had burned itself down to embers. He barely had time to register this before he heard a whooshing sound behind him. He turned around to find that a kitchen chair had burst into flames. Quickly, he grabbed the chair and flung it outside into the snow. He hardly had time to catch his breath before a couch on the other side of the room suddenly burst into flames. This too he dragged out into the snow. The family tried to rationalize what had happened and decided that the range must be somehow faulty. That evening, the range was allowed to burn out, and when it was cold, Alex took it apart to try and find any blockages or anything unusual, but found nothing. As a final precaution, he climbed onto the home's roof and poured a bucket of water down the stovepipe. Satisfied that the range was safe, the family went to sleep. The very next morning, Janet shook her husband awake around 5 a.m., claiming she could smell smoke. Her husband said he couldn't smell anything, but at her insistence, he went downstairs to investigate. He discovered a patch of the ceiling was in flames. After hurling buckets of water at it, he was satisfied that it was out. However, as he went upstairs to report back to his wife, he heard a sound behind him and turned around to find that the very same patch of ceiling that he just extinguished and was still dripping wet was on fire again. The next day, the stovepipe itself caught fire, and that night, 5 separate ceiling fires were dealt with by the increasingly exhausted Alexander McDonald. Fortunately, the next day was fire-free, and the McDonalds were able to get some rest. However, their troubles were far from over. Late in the afternoon of the following day, a patch of wallpaper burst into flames. Moments after this fire had been put out, the ceiling above the kitchen range was once again in flames. After this had been extinguished, a fire was discovered in the upstairs bedroom, in a pile of rags used for cleaning. At this point, the McDonalds had abandoned all conventional explanations and had accepted that some malevolent force was at work. Janet and Mary Ellen left to ask the neighbors for help while Alex remained at home. 2 brothers, Leo and Dan McGilvray, and a third neighbor, Duncan McDonald, arrived several hours later to help. Alex had already had to deal with 3 fires since his wife and foster daughter had left to get the neighbors. During that night, the 6 people present in the home had to deal with an astounding 30 fires. This included such bizarre and seemingly impossible instances as a piece of paper on a table suddenly burning away and a dishcloth soaking in a bowl of water bursting into flames. At one point during the night, the McGilvray brothers were outside the home talking when they noticed an arm waving what looked like a piece of cotton out of an upstairs window. They rushed back inside to find that all 3 members of the family, as well as Duncan McDonald, were seated in the kitchen. There would have been no time for any of them to get downstairs in the time it took for the McGilvrays to come back inside, and there was no one in the upstairs bedroom. The next morning, the McGilvray brothers offered for the McDonald family to come and stay with them. The family agreed, and fortunately, unlike the Macomb and Alabama fire poltergeists, the phenomena did not follow the family to their new lodgings. Alex McDonald would return to the home twice a day to care for the livestock, but the home was, for the time being, left abandoned. By this time, word of the mysterious hauntings had gotten out, and reporters traveled to the McGilvray home to seek interviews. The McDonalds declined to speak to the press, but the McGilvrays did, and soon newspapers around the world were carrying stories about the haunting. One reporter, Harold B. Whidden from Halifax, Nova Scotia, managed to talk Alexander McDonald into letting him stay a few nights in the home. Alex McDonald agreed to accompany him, as did a member of the Nova Scotian Provincial Police, Detective P.O. Carroll. The first night in the home was uneventful. On the second night, Whidden and Carroll were sitting in chairs in the living room while Alex McDonald slept on the floor nearby. Both men suddenly heard the sound of footsteps in the bedroom above, along with strange sounds that neither man could describe. After a few minutes, the sound ceased. The men waited in the quiet when all of a sudden, Whidden felt something punch him hard in the arm. Startled, he looked over at Carroll, who, before Whidden could say anything, asked him if he felt that, for Carroll too had experienced a violent blow to the arm. The next morning, both men left the farmhouse badly shaken. Whidden, previously a skeptic, was now a firm believer in the paranormal. As newspapers published stories of Whidden and Carroll's experiences, a scientist named Edward O'Brien reported that he believed he had found the cause of the mysterious fires, radio waves. Though Guglielmo Marconi had invented the radio in 1895, it was not until the early 1920s that the first radio stations went into operation and the first transmission towers began to be erected. This led to considerable public debate on the possible effects of radio waves on humans, similar to the debates in recent times about the effects of Wi-Fi. O'Brien claimed that the McDonald farm was at the nexus of several radio transmission towers, and that the problem could be solved by relocating the farm. This theory was so widely publicized that even Marconi himself was drawn into the debate, attempting to assure the public that there was no way that radio waves could cause fires. O'Brien also had an explanation for the experiences of Whidden and Carroll. He said that conditions were so cold in the burned-out farmhouse that the men's minds had began playing tricks on them. As for the incidents with the McDonald's animals being let loose, he dismissed them as pranks by Mary Ellen. At around the same time that O'Brien's theories were being debated, Dr. Walter Franklin Prince arrived in Caledonia Mills. Prince was a leading member of the American Institute of Scientific Research and the executive officer of the Boston Society for Psychic Research, and had been approached to investigate the happenings at the McDonald homestead. Before arriving in Canada, Prince believed the haunting to be a classic case of poltergeist activity centered around Mary Ellen. However, after spending about 3 weeks investigating the haunting, he came away with a different conclusion. Prince claimed that Mary Ellen, whom he described as having the mind of a 4-year-old child, had started the fires. He claimed she had done so by lighting wads of cotton on fire and throwing them into positions where they would spring alight minutes later, and claimed he had also discovered a bottle of an odorless, flammable liquid hidden within the farmhouse. Newspapers quickly reported Prince's conclusions as fact, and the publicity reached Dr. Thaddeus L. Bolton of Temple University, Philadelphia. He recalled to the press how 9 years earlier he had been called to investigate a poltergeist in Missoula, Missouri, centered around a 9-year-old girl named Mary Ellen McDonald. Her father was also named Alexander. Dr. Bolton presided over a seance in the home, after which it caught fire and burned down. Many newspapers published this report and led their readers to believe that the McDonald family had relocated to Nova Scotia after this incident and that Mary Ellen was a serial arsonist. It didn't seem to matter that the two families could not possibly have been the same people. The McDonalds had lived in Caledonia Mills their entire lives. As well, the ages did not add up. If they were the same people as the Missouri McDonalds, then Mary Ellen should have been 18, not 15, and Alexander should have been 45, not 70. With the press now firmly against Mary Ellen McDonald, locals who had known the family for years attempted to make their voices heard. They said that Prince's characterization of Mary Ellen as having the mind of a 4-year-old was absurd to anyone who had known her, and questioned how she could have started fires which occurred when she was not even home at the time. Some older residents claimed that the hauntings at the McDonald homestead had started long before Mary Ellen had been adopted, a story that was backed up by Janet McDonald. They claimed that a large black dog, known in Gaelic mythology as a Cú Sith, a harbinger of death, had been sighted several times on the property by Alex's elderly mother. One night, after a bad argument, Janet had screamed at the old woman, "I hope that you're dead by morning and the devil comes to take you." At that very instant, the Cú Sith had entered the house and walked around it before leaving. The senior Mrs. McDonald was indeed dead by morning. Had Janet inadvertently cursed her home and family, or was her mother-in-law's ghost fire-starting in revenge? At this point, the McDonald family were fed up with scientific experts and had called in several priests to bless the home. Feeling safe to return, the McDonalds moved back into their house. Throughout that summer, everything was quiet. However, in October, the mysterious fires once again began breaking out. Police arrived at the home and took Mary Ellen into custody. There was no trial. She was committed to the Nova Scotia Home for the Insane in Dartmouth, where she was held in solitary confinement, as it was thought that she might set fires to show off to the other inmates. The fires in the McDonald farmhouse stopped, which solidified Dr. Prince's findings in the minds of most of the public. What happened to Mary Ellen McDonald after that is something of a mystery, as sources differ as to her ultimate fate. According to some, she lived the rest of her life in the asylum. According to others, she was eventually released and moved to Ontario, where she married, raised a family, and lived a long life, passing away sometime in the 1980s. Let's hope that the second source is the correct one. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please like, check out my other videos, and subscribe.